I get so many questions on this subject. I think it's time I did a video on the subject because people always ask me, should we apply epoxy in rough concrete? So you've got like a rough surface. It's not like a proper concrete. It's like a concrete that someone laid it many years ago, and now you're thinking of improving the floor somehow. And the question is, well, can I use epoxy for that? And it's hard to give a precise answer, but let me start by saying if that concrete is soft and powdery, then the answer is no. And I'll show you a few pictures why it should be no. The problem is that when you have a floor, when you have concrete, and let's say this is like your rough concrete here, there tends to be a surface up here, right, that is all very, very loose and rough. So if you think you can just apply epoxy on top of that and somehow that will be fine, what will happen is the concrete will start breaking. So what you have is the epoxy detaches itself, not the epoxy breaking, but it's actually the whole concrete breaks. And this is why I'll show you in a picture now what happens when the concrete detaches itself from the concrete because you applied epoxy on top. So my answer is no, do not use it if it's soft and powdery. Because you won't get the result. What you'll have is a full failure. So it's happened to me. When I started out in epoxies, I thought I could apply epoxy on a soft and powdery surface. For the first 6 months, it looked amazing, and then it started cracking in places, and within a few months, the whole floor had cracked. So do not apply it. And I also have a key test, because what exactly do we mean by soft and powdery? How do we know? Then before you bring out some expensive equipment to measure how resistant is this concrete, how do I know if this concrete is strong enough or not strong enough? I like to use a key test. So take out a key and like your car keys and try to like drag it, scratch the concrete and see what happens. If the concrete leaves like a dent, like an indentation, like a serious mark, and like powder comes out, then you know that concrete is quite soft. I mean, if a single pull of a car key leaves a mark on it, well, what happens then if tomorrow you want to put like weights on that, you want to walk on that floor? It's very likely it won't last very long. Then again, if you try the key test and all you get is like a scratch mark, but no significant indent or no powder comes out of the floor, well then in that case, I think you're good to go. It's a tough floor. However, you still need to do a few things to make that floor operational. Because if you try to apply again epoxy on a rough floor, you're gonna get, you cannot level the floor with just epoxy. This is why here I've written beware of self-leveling epoxy, which is another issue with self-leveling. People think I'll just take some self-leveling epoxy, I'll pour it over rough concrete, and abracadabra, all of a sudden my floor is smooth. And that will not happen. And the main reason is because when we're talking about rough concrete, we're usually talking about a difference in elevation. The difference in the roughness is at least 5, maybe 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters. And epoxy tends to go up to 3-4 millimeters. You don't really want to add more than that. So do not try to use epoxy to like reach to cover a thickness that is that large, like 1 or 2 centimeters. So how do you deal with a tough concrete, but it's rough? Well, there's not one solution. People tend to like say, oh, just use that product and you'll be fine. In my experience, you need to use a combination of tools to make your rough concrete flat and coatable with epoxy. And those tools are, for starters, you want to do some grinding. And the reason you do grinding, especially on a rough floor, is because you want to like remove these peaks. You've got all these peaks. It may not be possible to grind all the way down so you've got like a flat floor like here, but at least you want to start removing these peaks so you've got less peaks to deal with, and you kind of, by removing the peaks, then you can work on the holes. So step 1 is do some grinding. Number 2 is you can use a leveling compound like cementitious leveling compounds. They are quite common, and that is an option. So you can, after you've done your grinding, you can add like a leveling compound to kind of achieve a better overall leveling, and that will cover up all the little holes. And then once you've achieved that level, then you can look into epoxy and using an epoxy primer. So you apply a primer on top of the leveling compound. You may still need to do some patching. You may still have scratches and cracks and various other problems. You can use your epoxy for patching. So I definitely recommend that if you are going to do this job, you do a combination. Now, maybe you don't have to do all 4 of these. You can do 3 of them or 2 of them, but understand that do not assume there's one solution to solve your rough concrete. And I want to emphasize what I said at the start. If it's a soft and powdery epoxy, it will fail very quickly. So in that case, I always say, if you plan to use this floor for like a heavy duty job, you want to use it for a factory maybe, or you want to use it for like a heavy duty warehouse, you're best off just kind of applying a proper concrete screed on top, like a floated trowel concrete on top, rather than or what we call helicopter concrete, with a proper hardener, so you have a hard concrete, rather than trying to do like intermediate jobs with epoxies. Because let's face it, even if you do all these 4 things, they will come out to quite expensive. They're not cheap if you do all these 4 things. So sometimes you want to look at your options, and maybe your best choice is to just apply like a proper new concrete screed on top. This is a complicated subject. You definitely can't just have one answer. Every single project is different, and a lot of times it's up to the people who are involved to use their own judgment. I just gave you some guidelines, but from my experience, every single floor, like every single concrete is different. So it really comes up to what your budget is, what your options are. Do you have the option of like going up a few centimeters? It depends on what the use will be for that floor. So consider all these factors before you decide on what to do with a rough concrete. But definitely, if it's soft, it won't last very long. I'll tell you that much. Anyway, have a look at these other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and if you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. Thank you.